Hey guys, real quick, I'm going to do an intro before I do my intro. After cutting this footage together, I realized that it is a little bit lengthy and a little bit dry. It's all very interesting information as far as I'm concerned, but if you don't want to see the process and you just want to see the numbers, you want to see how I get to this stuff behind me, go ahead and skip towards the end. You're not going to hurt my feelings. If you want to see how I got there though, stick around. Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Today's project is actually more of a science experiment involving cutting boards. My personal preference is the end grain variety of cutting board. I just like the way they look and the way they work a little bit better, but that's not really the point here. The point here is that, let me start with a little story. A couple of years ago, I did a quick video on repairing an end grain board that had a crack in it. And in that video, I had to actually cut through the entire board to cut out the portion that had a crack in it. Now, when I finish my boards, I like to soak them in mineral oil because it's quick and easy and it does a good job. And in my mind, because it's end grain, it's supposedly the porous direction of the wood fibers. In my mind, I had it that oil line would penetrate pretty deeply into the wood. So when I cut that thing open, I expected to see a line, and I was surprised at how shallow that line was. You almost couldn't even tell from the side that there was even oil on it. I expected to see a line, a 1/4 inch, an 1/8 inch, something down into the wood fibers, and it just wasn't there. Now that could have been because that board had not been oiled in a while, and maybe that oil line receded. I thought there would at least be some evidence of it, but that's beside the point. That is the reason I want to do this test. I'm going to take this board that I just finished. It's a little less desirable, so it's a perfect one for cutting up and testing on. But it's done exactly the same way as I do all my other boards. It's sanded all the way up to 220. I raised the grain, I sanded it back off. We're good to go. I'm going to put this board in the oil, and we're going to start with a ½ hour. Soak it for a ½ hour, dry it off, cut it in half, and see where that oil line ends up being. All right, so this is our first test. This is after the first 30 minutes. So I'm going to write that. This is going to be pretty subjective because you can see it definitely soaked in on some places. None of this color would have been here before, but it kind of looks like a sawtooth where some of it's a little deeper and some of it's a little bit less. So I am going to take a measurement just for fun. I don't think this is going to be very scientific. We're going to say, there's 1.2. Some of that's a little bigger than that. Some of it's a little smaller than that. So that's the first part of our test. After a ½ hour, we're claiming that it soaked roughly 1/8 of an inch in from the top and the bottom. I don't imagine it could ever penetrate to the absolute center, but that's what the point of this test is. So I'm going to clean this off really well so I don't contaminate my oil bath. And go throw this back in there and we'll do another cut 24 hours from now. All right, I've got the board dried off after soaking for 24 hours and I'm ready to cut off another test chunk. I pulled the test chunk from the ½ hour mark out so I can compare the two, and this already gave me a result I wasn't quite prepared for. If you take a look, we are no longer at that 1/8 thickness. We've got more like 3/4. And what happened there is after we cut it off, the oil that was in that 1/8 had more surface area that it could go on, and then it just kind of kept crawling. So if I could segment this a little bit further, it probably wouldn't look like this on the inside. This is because this became a new edge, but it does make it so that I can't set all these side by side after the fact and compare them. So it's a good thing I took that 1/8 measurement from the start so that I can have some kind of a measurement from this now 24-hour cut. So let's get it cut and let's see what that looks like. So that makes a lot of difference. If you look, that is much, much deeper than that 1/8 penetration. It looks a lot like the ½ hour one did after having another 24 hours to go along the edge. So Boy, 24 hours goes way, way in there. I can measure this really quick, just kind of generally by eye. I'm going to say that's pretty average spot. That's just under a 1/2 inch. That's a pretty average spot. This is cool. So, back into the oil. We'll do this again at 1 week. Let's try that. I'm gonna guess after a week, it will penetrate all the way to center, but we'll see. All right, guys, I kind of called an audible on this one. I was hoping to wait a full week from the start date before I did the next one, but the more I thought about it, since the 24-hour mark penetrated almost a 1/2 inch from both sides, and this is only 1 3/8 inches, it is now only 48 hours since I initially put this in the oil. So we're gonna try a 48-hour test and see if that actually got us all the way to center yet. Wow, so if you take a look, there are spots where it's absolutely penetrated all the way through, and there are spots where it actually looks like it hasn't penetrated much at all. I'm thinking at this point, this board is almost as saturated as it's ever gonna get, with the exception of maybe grain type is holding up the show in a few spots. I meant to try to get it on the edge so we saw some oak and some walnut in the same spot. But, well, I missed. But we kind of have the same thing showing here. It's all the way through in some spots and not really penetrating very far at all in others. So I'm going to go ahead and say that I think this thing is almost holding all it can take after 48 hours. But I am going to go throw it back in the oil. We'll do one more 24 hours from now just to see if we can get this thing all the way through or what the deal is. All right, here we are back again. Now we've done 72 hours or 3 days in the oil bath. Let's see what we get. Looks very, very similar to the 24-hour one. And now we do have some oak as well as the walnut to sort of compare to, but looks to me, focus, focus, focus. Looks to me like most of the walnut, with the exception of that little spot right there, is completely penetrated through. And it looks like the oak actually is taking a little bit longer, which surprises me. I thought that would be just a little bit more porous, and you'd get through that just a little faster. 48 to 72, 2 days to 3 days, doesn't look like there's been much of a change. I think I'll go throw it back in the oil. We'll try it one more time. Maybe it's to the point where it just can't suck up anymore. That wouldn't surprise me. So yeah, at this point I'm thinking at least one more test. All right, back again, day 4 of letting the board soak in oil. Let's cut it, let's see how far we got, see if there's any change from day 3. Looks pretty similar to day 3. So you can tell that some of it has actually soaked all the way through, but there's dry spots for sure. There's some dry spots more in the walnut this time than in the oak like there was after the day 3. I just can't explain that. I think what I'm going to do is throw it in the oil and leave it for a week now. We have proved that after 48 hours, it's almost soaked all the way through. After 48 additional hours, it doesn't change much. I'm going to give it a week. I'm going to see if it'll actually soak 100% all the way through, just because I'm curious. Not that that's really relevant, but we'll try it again. I'm not going to do it daily anymore. We'll try it again in a week. All right, guys, back again. It has now been about 12 days since this thing was originally dunked into the oil. 4 days of the first testing period that we already saw. 7 days of just sitting untouched, maybe jostling the bin a little bit to get the oil moving around in there. And then 1 day of just drip drying on the rack to try to get as much surface stuff just to drip back off. I will say it's noticeably heavier than when I started. I wish I would have thought of that ahead of time and weighed it with nothing and then weighed it with the oil. Maybe that's another test for another time. Well, we are not untouched. We are not completely saturated. Go ahead and look. Looks to me like we haven't changed It has a maximum carrying capacity for oil is what I'm telling by this. It looks a lot like it did after the 3rd day. Didn't change even after an extra week in the oil. So I'm gonna cut over to the whiteboard here and try to make some sense of what we just saw, try to wrap this thing up. All right, I'm gonna take a real quick second to go back over the information that I got and try to make sense of my ramblings from before. After 30 minutes in the oil, there was a very distinct but very small penetration line of roughly 1/8 of an inch. So I'm gonna say 1/8 of an inch in a half hour is what we got. After a full 24 hours, one full day, it moved up to a 1/2 inch, and that's penetrating from both sides. After 48 hours, after 2 days, it had gone all the way through in some spots and didn't quite get through in other spots. That's what these patchy spots are. That could be wood type, that could be wood grain, it could be grain direction. Who knows? Maybe I got too close to a branch or a knot or something and the wood is denser in those spots. I don't really know. Jumping ahead to day 3, it was pretty much the same as day 2. Jumping even further, we went for a week from that time. Now we're 11 days from the start and it hasn't changed much at all. So after 3 days, I'm gonna say it has reached its absolute maximum oil sucking capacity. After 30 minutes, it is more than enough for what I think a cutting board should be finished to. So what's the point of all this? Well, number one, the video that spurred this whole thing, that old cutting board that I cut apart and tested that had no line, that had apparently not been treated in months. Apparently it can dry out to the point that there is no evidence of there ever having been oil interior like this. Number two, you don't need to soak a board anywhere near this long. It was just out of curiosity. I would say, based on what I've done in the past and what I've seen here, I'm going to soak a board for 10 to 15 minutes and move on. Especially if you have a lot to do, get them in, get them out. They're going to have enough to do the job. So anyway, I think that's all I can ramble on about for this. Thank you guys for watching. Did it answer any questions? Did it raise any more questions? Do you want to see any other types of tests like this? I do think that I'm going to take the board that I tested on and put it on a shelf and leave it for a month. And then maybe I'll take a cut and see if the line is receded. And then maybe it'll take a year. I don't know. I might do that test. If it's uninteresting, I might not. So what was the point of that? There was no point. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.